It's never been easier to build software. But what does that mean for open source? So the reality is that many open source projects have started to change their contribution guidelines. Zig and Godot are two of them that have started banning AI contributions. Now, this isn't particularly new news. And there are some other projects where they simply use open source to build in the open, but contributions aren't accepted. The one example from this week is Grok Build, though I think the actual reason why Grok Build is even open source in the first place is because of the recent headlines about it just having issues, or rather the claim that it's just uploading your whole code base, including secrets. So they made it open source in the name of transparency more than to encourage contributions. Another one of those examples is around PyHarness. So we can have a look at that. So let's look at PyHarness. So with the PyHarness, you can see at the bottom with a contribution, by default, everything is just auto closed. And even I believe with issues, is just only reviewed at certain particular times. If we look at, this is a Grok build, we can see the SpaceX Eye. They developed the software internally, but the public tree is published for source transparency. That's in response to this week's controversy about the claim that they just upload everything to Grok, including your secrets. And here's the other thing. I think this was a quote or analogy that went online a bit during June, and I think it's something worth repeating, that the submission of a pull request, although it's like free code, right? It's not really free as in the same as in like free speech or free beer, but rather it's more like a free puppy. And this was an analogy given by Richard Hipp from the SQLite. And whilst the acquisition of something like a free puppy is, well, free, the recipient bears the moral and practical obligation to feed, train, and care for the puppy for as long as we own the puppy, right? Like that's the issue with pull requests and contributions, is that the person just gives you the pull request and, well, there's no onus on that person to follow up on issues relating to that pull request or anything like that. That's given to the maintainers. So what happens is that an additional feature means way more effort in terms of like what that means for the code base and the implications. Now, if you throw in LLMs into it, of course, well, then you just have this explosion of features and explosion of pull requests. And that's exactly what has happened, right? There's like this increased drive-by PRs, AI hallucinations. There's just so many examples that we can see. And it just means that there's more and more pressure on the maintainers. Why has this happened, and why is it a much bigger deal now? Well, before, the people who would contribute to open source software, they were self-selecting. They had to understand the code base. Then through understanding the code base, they would submit their change and try to convince the maintainers why this was important and fight for a feature. Generally, if you were submitting a patch or a change, it's because you were a user of that software and you were deeply invested into it. Now with LLMs, you don't have to be a user of the software. You could just be the LLM, just read the software and you decided to prompt it to do something. You're probably not as invested in the particular change anymore. So yeah, that has led to a situation where some projects have just outright banned things, like Godot and Zig being two of them. Zig's community is probably the more interesting one, where their rationale for banning LLMs and AI is about trying to curate the members of the community, which is what I alluded to earlier, where they want users or people who are deeply invested in Zig or deeply invested in the particular software that they're writing, right? So if someone who is deeply invested in the software, well, then the maintainer should spend time on enhancing those contributions and ensuring those people are members of the community that they want to be around. And that makes total sense. And well, whilst some people might see it as to be like overly harsh, well, yeah, I think it's just how it is. It's just to protect people's sanity ultimately. The bigger the piece of software, like Godot and Zig, it just attracts way more people and way more attention. That's the reality. So if we were to look at like how some of these things work, traditional open source software, free and open source software, it's just attracted a lot of slop and spam and people burning out. And then you have the people in the middle, so Zig and Godot, where maybe they're rejecting good code, but that's not really the focus from their perspective. It's about building the community and maintaining people. And finally, the last group of people, like Grok and SQLite, the purpose of their open source software is perhaps more for transparency to the community, and it's less about fostering any kind of community at all. And well, each of these have their own upsides and downsides, but there's different ways for how they think about the community. So here's one thought that I've had, and that is, if you really need something from open source, I think with LLMs being so cheap, you could just build it yourself and maintain it yourself. I personally have had experiences with this in terms of like making changes and maintaining on my side. I like to use AI. I use like the Llama CPP and Stable Diffusion CPP, and I've had to make some changes to like the GGML side of things to get things working the way that I liked it to work, based on some of the patches that have been submitted but haven't been merged. So like that requires maintaining a fork separately. The good news is that there are tools to do this. Probably the most popular one, or the most well-known one rather, is Copybara, which is from Google. And this is a tool that is specifically used for transforming and moving code between repositories, as it says at the very top. And there are many use cases for doing this. I think Google primarily uses it more for transferring code from their internal repositories to the public repositories, but it could be made in many other ways, such as your own private code, right? If you just want to selectively pull changes down, that is totally another way to do it, right? And that's like probably more the last situation where the change is from a non-authoritative repository and you are trying to move that particular piece into your own internal fork. So if we think about the long term, what does this really mean? I think it just means that there has to be a more sustainable way to do things. How people maintain things and how people think about software in general. There's going to be more curation ultimately. That's one of the things. As LLMs become cheaper to do, it might mean that features may get cold simply because of maintainer happiness. There probably are going to be different kinds of metrics that people care about in terms of what good software means. I don't know what that looks like today or what that means, but that's something to think about. And people are just going to be far more defensive. I think one example that I remember and I thought was really, really interesting, and note the date, it was from July 2022. This was before a lot of the LLM, all of the LLM agentic coding practices that were going around. And there was this one with Flask. And ignore the comments, it's not really about the comments in particular, but it was about there was like no more open issues or pull requests on Flask. And this is due to the maintainers having their particular taste or wanting to meet their particular bar or wanting to call their software complete. And I think that's really, really, really important that you can get to a state where you are comfortable with your software being complete as is, that there's no more issues and that it's in a good state and you're happy with it. I think that's a sign of really good software development. And personally, I wish that there were more examples of projects that approached it in that way, that there is an endpoint for their particular mature piece of software, right? As opposed to seeing the journey to be never ending. Personally, that's something that has resonated with me, and well, something that I would love to see more of. But yeah, that's what I have and what I found interesting in this week.